Number 17. Riley Ann Sac. In October 2019, footage of an accused hit-and-run driver ripping the bumper off her own car in Lake Elsinore, California, went viral. The distraught young woman behind the wheel, later identified as 22-year-old Riley Ann Sac, could be seen trying to maneuver her way out of a parking space that an eyewitness had blocked with their vehicle. As Sabac's car backed up into the bystander's minivan, the person filming could be heard accusing the woman of committing a double hit-and-run and reminding her that it was a felony. Sac exited her car to check the minivan for damage while saying, "You don't understand how mean my grandma is." She then picked up her busted front bumper, which appeared to have fallen off during her attempt to flee, and crammed it inside her car. And as she tried once again to drive away, she pleaded with the witness to move his minivan out of the way. But the man told Sac that she needed to do the right thing. Sac managed to flee the scene, almost hitting the witness, and apologized before speeding off. According to Tire Meet Road blogger Paulo Acoba, Sac was contacted by law enforcement and was issued a summons for a later court date. Records indicate that the case is ongoing and that a pre-trial hearing was held in September 2023. Number 16. Alexandra Mendes. 23-year-old Alexandra Mendes made the regretful decision to drive after having at least 5 alcoholic beverages at a Glendale, Arizona bar in December 2021. 8 minutes after getting behind the wheel, she fatally struck a man on his bicycle, roughly 3 miles from the bar. Later identified as 29-year-old Chris Owen, the victim was on his way to work when he was mowed down. He'd recently started a new job at an Amazon warehouse 3 weeks earlier, and was happy with how his life was going at the time. Mendes fled the scene and was still at large 6 days later when her car was found abandoned. According to law enforcement, the vehicle had damage consistent with a hit-and-run involving a bicycle. So authorities charged Mendes with manslaughter and leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death or injury. Much to the disappointment of the victim's family, Mendes cut a deal and pleaded guilty to leaving the scene in exchange for the manslaughter charge being dropped. She's currently serving a 4.5-year prison sentence, while Owen's loved ones push for legal changes that would allow for harsher punishments against hit-and-run drivers. Speaking with ABC 15, the family acknowledged that not all hit-and-run drivers are arrested or even identified, and they expressed their gratitude that the driver who fatally struck Chris was caught. But they believe more needs to be done to ensure that justice can truly be served in these types of cases. Number 15. Phoebe Copus. 52-year-old Daniel Piedra Garcia had been working as an Uber driver in El Paso, Texas for 3 weeks when he received a request to drive 48-year-old Phoebe Copus, a tourist from Kentucky, to a local casino where her boyfriend worked. During the ride in June of 2023, Copus pulled a gun from her purse and shot Garcia in the head, causing the car to crash into a road barrier. Before calling 911, Copus allegedly took a photo of the gravely injured driver and sent it to her boyfriend, who left work and came to the scene. Garcia was rushed to the hospital, where his family made the devastating decision to take him off life support after he was declared brain dead. Copus reportedly told investigators that she started to panic when she saw a sign along the road for the Mexican border city of Juarez. She claimed that she shot Garcia because she feared she was being kidnapped. According to a police report, Garcia was driving a normal route to the casino, and the shooting didn't even happen near any bridges or ports of entry into Mexico. The report further stated that Copus failed to call 911 before the shooting to report that she felt she was in danger. Copus is now facing a murder charge and could face 99 years to life in prison if convicted. If the defense and prosecution fail to reach a plea agreement by December 2023, the case will go to trial in February of 2024. Number 14. Isim Menitute. In 2021, an 18-year-old Virginia Tech football player named Isim Menitute matched on Tinder with a woman seeking an intimate encounter in Blacksburg. He believed he was going to meet a 28-year-old doctor named Angie Renee, who said she needed to keep her apartment dark to protect her privacy due to her career. Itute initially didn't question this requirement, but he became suspicious after 2 of his teammates showed up at the same place and were put off by the situation. Etute returned to Angie Renee's apartment while his teammates waited in the hallway. While there, he felt around and realized that the person he was hooking up with was biologically male. So he punched the person repeatedly in the head and left the apartment, leaving a trail of bloody footprints in his wake. The person calling themselves Angie Renee was identified as 40-year-old Jerry Smith, an openly gay man with a lengthy criminal history. His brother found him dead and covered in blood shortly after the ill-fated encounter. Etute claimed that he thought he saw Smith reaching for a weapon when he began throwing punches. He also said that he didn't think he'd seriously hurt Smith. Prosecutors nevertheless charged him with second-degree murder, which carries a sentence of 5 to 40 years in prison. Following Etute's arrest, dozens of people came forward claiming that Smith had deceived them in similar ways. The oldest complaints dated as far back as 10 years, and evidence showed that he was using his Angie Renee persona at least as early as 2015. Investigators found a knife hidden under Smith's mattress, lending further credibility to Etute's self-defense claims. Prosecutors still pursued the case, though, giving the jury the option of convicting him of second-degree murder, a lesser manslaughter charge, or not guilty due to self-defense. Etute broke down in tears when the not guilty verdict was read, which meant that he still had a future. But the booty call gone wrong still came at an immense cost, including getting kicked out of college and being at the center of a controversial case that made national news. And there will always be people who doubt his innocence, even though his name has been officially cleared. Number 13. Stephen McDaniel. 27-year-old Mercer Law School graduate Lauren Giddings vanished from her apartment in Macon, Georgia in June 2011, and after not seeing or hearing from her for 3 days, her family and friends reported her missing. During the search that followed, local news station WGXA interviewed Giddings' neighbor and fellow law school graduate, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel. He described the young woman as nice as can be and very personable, and acted concerned for her well-being until someone mentioned that a body had been found. McDaniel suddenly went from seemingly calm to visibly terrified as he told reporters he needed to sit down. Lauren's dismembered torso had been found in a garbage can next to the building, and McDaniel's reaction to the news was suspicious enough for police to name him as a person of interest in the case. Unfortunately, though, the rest of her remains were never found. McDaniel voluntarily went to the police station for questioning, but was completely uncooperative during the interview. Meanwhile, detectives found a plethora of evidence showing that McDaniel stalked Giddings leading up to her death and that he was an incel who hated women in general. They also found physical evidence in McDaniel's apartment connecting him to the murder, including the victim's underwear and a stolen master key he'd used to break into her apartment. A month after Lauren's death, authorities charged McDaniel with murder, and 3 years later, he admitted to strangling Lauren, dismembering her body with a hacksaw, and disposing of most of it in a dumpster across the street, while throwing her torso into the garbage can where it was found. As a result, he was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison and will become eligible for parole in 2041. Number 12. Bob Slinsky. 28-year-old utility worker Carly Rabachik was directing traffic at a work site in Racine County, Wisconsin in March 2023 when a driver ignored her warning to slow down and slammed into her with his pickup truck. She was airlifted to the hospital with serious injuries, including 2 broken legs, broken arms, and broken ribs, along with multiple cuts and bruises. Miraculously, though, the young woman survived, but she faced a long road to recovery. Later identified as 41-year-old Bob Daniel Slinsky, the suspect fled the crime scene while authorities appealed to the public for help finding him. Acting on multiple tips, police paid a visit to Slinsky's home, where they found his truck in the backyard, covered by a tarp. Slinsky was charged with hit and run involving great bodily harm, reckless driving causing great bodily harm, and 2 counts of bail jumping. During questioning, he reportedly said that he was on his way to a substance abuse meeting when he sneezed and dropped his phone on the floor of his truck. He was trying to retrieve it when he hit Carly and claimed that he panicked and took off. Records show that Slinsky is being held on a $100,000 bond at the Racine County Jail while he awaits the next steps in his case. Number 11. Aras Moore. In April 2018, a 23-year-old Chicago man went on a violent crime spree that ultimately landed him in custody on a laundry list of charges that could put him away for years to come. It all began when Aras Moore accidentally shot his brother at their family's high-rise apartment and fled the scene. He allegedly carjacked 3 people at gunpoint, including an undercover police officer, and attempted to steal 2 more cars over a 2-hour period. Moore was accused of injuring 2 people by gunfire, one of which was a man in his 80s who fought back during one of the carjackings. But luckily, Moore was eventually cornered and arrested in the city's upscale Gold Coast neighborhood. In an odd twist, the suspect was charged in federal court rather than under state law. He faced 2 counts of attempted carjacking, 3 counts of carjacking, 3 counts of using, carrying, and brandishing a firearm during a crime of violence, and 2 additional counts of discharging a firearm during a crime of violence. While announcing the charges against Moore, U.S. Attorney John R. Lausch Jr. described carjacking as a senseless act of violence that has no place in society. But the young man's mother, Brenda Moore, told the Chicago Tribune that her son's reckless behavior was triggered by panic, saying it was a breaking point to where he got scared. Scared or not, though, it's illegal to steal a car at gunpoint, and the feds were determined to make an example out of Moore at a time when carjackings in Chicago were spiraling out of control. While the status of the case is unclear, records show that he remains in custody at the Chicago Metropolitan Correctional Center, which houses mostly pre-trial detainees and suspects with unresolved cases. Number 10. Zachary WHAS. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in September 2017, a thief robbed a gas station in Lafayette, Indiana, and fled in a getaway van that was waiting near the doors. A few minutes later, the same suspect held up another convenience store nearby and escaped in the same getaway van. The suspects were still at large the next day when police pulled over a van that resembled the one used in the robberies. 23-year-old Zachary Nicholas WHAS, who was riding as a passenger, panicked and fled the scene on foot. His behavior piqued the suspicions of law enforcement, who quickly caught up with the young man and arrested him on an outstanding warrant and for resisting during the traffic stop. After reviewing evidence from the robberies, police questioned WHAS about his suspected role in the crimes. He allegedly admitted to being the getaway driver and was held on suspicion of robbery and theft. His accused accomplice, Jacob Walter Farris, was apprehended several days later. Number 9. Yavon Moore. Police officers were watching from nearby one evening in 2014 when a suspect opened fire outside an Omaha grocery store. According to reports, 25-year-old Tyrone Brooks approached a group of men who were fighting and shot 38-year-old Antonio Taylor twice. But thankfully, the victim survived. Brooks fled in a waiting SUV driven by 27-year-old Yavon Moore and threw the gun from the vehicle. After tracking the pair down, authorities charged Brooks with second-degree assault, use of a weapon to commit a felony, and defacing a firearm. Moore was charged with accessory to a felony and flight to avoid arrest. Her sister Natalia Moore told the Omaha World Herald that Yavon didn't know Brooks very well, but gave him a ride to the grocery store when he asked, unaware of the violence that was about to go down. After the shooting, Yavon reportedly panicked because Brooks had a gun. She didn't know what to do because she felt she was in danger, so she drove away from the scene. Records show that Brooks was convicted as charged and is serving a 10-year prison sentence. He became eligible for parole in 2018, but remains behind bars with a projected release date of August 2024. The outcome of Moore's case is unclear, but hopefully she managed to put the incident behind her and move on with her life. Number 8. Edmund Rigs. Only 2 people will ever know what happened leading up to the death of 34-year-old Patricia Riggs at her home in Margate, Australia in 2001. Patricia took her side of the story with her to the grave, while her husband, Edmund Riggs, told nobody about what happened and buried her body near a beach. A few years later, Edmund noticed digging equipment near the burial site, and fearing his secret would be discovered, he exhumed Patricia's skeleton and reburied the bones in his backyard. He left the grave untouched when he moved out, and in 2016, 15 years after Patricia's disappearance, the new owners uncovered her remains. Edmund admitted that he and Patricia had gotten into a vicious argument on her last day alive, after Patricia found a handwritten list of escorts in his pocket. He'd later testify in court that Patricia claimed that she was also seeing other people, spewed emasculating insults at him, and spat in his face. According to Edmund's version of events, he shoved his wife because he didn't want her to continue spitting on him, and she fell backward, hitting her head on a bedpost. He said that Patricia immediately went into convulsions and died seconds later, and that he panicked and buried her body. Edmund's lawyer argued that after his client had moved Patricia's body once, he became even more worried that the police wouldn't believe her death was an accident. He was especially scared to get in trouble because he didn't want to miss out on raising his 4 kids. The prosecution scoffed at Edmund's defense, describing him as a calculated, manipulative, and deliberate killer who murdered his wife in a violent fit of rage. In 2019, a jury found him guilty of a reduced manslaughter charge after concluding that the intent to kill Patricia couldn't be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. While handing down a 15-year prison sentence, the judge made it clear that he didn't believe Patricia's death was an accident and that he thought Edmund was lying. Number 7. Alexander Malayev. While responding to a disturbance call in 1996, police in Salt Lake County, Utah found 22-year-old Michelle Turner stabbed to death in a pool of blood. Investigators soon learned that the married young woman had recently ended an affair with her co-worker, 23-year-old Alexandra Malayev. She was helping Malayev move into the apartment where she was killed in an attempt to calm the breakup. The two had gotten into an argument when Malayev insisted on paying a parking ticket for Turner, and she refused to let him. Malayev then flew into a rage and stabbed Turner at least 17 times in a frenzied knife attack. And when the blade on the knife he was using broke, he grabbed another one and continued stabbing Turner. Not surprisingly, Malayev was charged with murder. During his trial, his attorney argued that he'd been driven to the brink of insanity, while friends described Turner essentially as a gold digger who preyed on Malayev's infatuation with her for self-gain. Meanwhile, prosecutors accused Malayev of acting out of jealousy over the relationship ending and reminded the court that a breakup is no reason to kill someone. The jury found Malayev guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. During a parole hearing in 2021, he claimed that panic caused him to attack Turner and that he wasn't thinking clearly. Despite Malayev's refusal to take more credit for the murder as a deliberate, conscious act, the parole board voted in favor of releasing him. After serving 24 years, he was released into the custody of federal authorities, pending a decision on his immigration status. Number 6. Christopher Robinson. A 60-year-old homeless woman named Kim Lucia was walking along a roadside in Rochester, New Hampshire on a Friday night in 2023 when she was fatally mowed down by a pickup truck. The driver fled the scene and police found her unresponsive and bleeding on the ground, with her belongings scattered nearby. Several days later, 43-year-old Christopher Robinson showed up at a local police station with his lawyer and admitted to hitting Lucia. He said that there wasn't enough time to avoid hitting Lucia by the time he saw her, and that he freaked out and panicked as he drove away. Robinson claimed that he was sober at the time of the accident and denied that he was using his cell phone while driving. According to law enforcement, the hit-and-run driver had still not been identified when Robinson came forward and took responsibility for his actions. And after speaking with someone he visited that night, viewing surveillance footage and examining damage to Robinson's truck, investigators concluded that his story was consistent with the evidence. Robinson faces a felony charge of conduct after an accident, which can come with a prison sentence of 3.5 to 7 years and a maximum fine of $4,000 if convicted. He was indicted on the charge in October 2023 and is out on bond pending the outcome of the case. While the prosecutor has argued that the defendant is guilty by his own admission, Robinson's attorney told the court that his client is deeply remorseful and that he demonstrated a desire to do the right thing by turning himself in after making the poor decision to flee the scene. Because he has no prior criminal record and has been cooperative with authorities, the judge overseeing the case is allowing him to keep his driver's license while the case works its way through the court system. Number 5. Nathaniel Shimel. In 2017, Michelle Shimel decided that it was time for her 22-year-old son, Nathaniel Shimel, to grow up, so she threatened to kick him out of their home in Palm Coast, Florida, if he didn't get a job. Nathaniel would later claim that his mother was grabbing his arm and yelling at him to look at her when she was speaking, causing him to lose all self-control and stab her repeatedly in the throat. After chasing Michelle out of the house and killing her, Nathaniel dialed 911 and claimed that a masked intruder had forced their way into the house and attacked his mother. He claimed that he'd escaped and fled to a friend's house and acted like he didn't know that Michelle was dead. But when the police arrived, they immediately noticed that he had cuts on his body and his clothes were covered in blood. Nathaniel soon admitted to murdering his mother and gave a detailed confession of the act. He described watching Michelle bleed out and admitted to leaving the knife plunged in her back in an effort to make it look like an assailant had stabbed her. The chilling account also included details about how Michelle desperately pleaded with her son not to kill her and how terrified she looked throughout the course of the attack. Perhaps Nathaniel panicked at the thought of being homeless or a fear of not being able to find a job, or maybe his mother's anger truly scared him. For one reason or another, the young man claimed that he panicked. He pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Between time served and the possibility of earning good time, he could be paroled as early as 2060 after serving 42.5 years. He'll be 64 years old before he even has a chance at seeing freedom again. Number 4. Lonnie Weeks Jr. 50-year-old Virginia State Trooper Jose M. Cavazos was senselessly shot dead during a routine traffic stop in Gail City in February 1993. According to reports, he stopped a car for speeding shortly after midnight, most likely unaware that the vehicle had been reported stolen. The passenger, later identified as 20-year-old Lonnie Weeks Jr., fired 5 bullets into Cavazos and left him to die on the side of the highway. Police found the stolen car abandoned nearby, and with help from tracking canines, they caught up with Weeks and the car's driver, 21-year-old Louis Jefferson Dukes Jr., at a local motel. Both men initially denied any involvement in the murder, but Dukes eventually admitted to being at the scene and blamed Weeks as the triggerman. Dukes claimed that Weeks panicked when they were pulled over, saying, "I can't go back to jail." Trooper Cavazos was searching Dukes outside the car when Weeks sprang out of the passenger side with a gun and opened fire. Weeks later confessed to being the shooter and admitted that Cavazos hadn't drawn his gun when he decided to pull the trigger, and as a consequence, he was charged with capital murder. During his trial, his defense attorney argued that the young man panicked during the traffic stop and that he was deeply remorseful for his actions. The jury found Weeks guilty as charged, and he was sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection in the year 2000. Dukes, on the other hand, was convicted of first-degree murder and is currently serving life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Number 3. Quang Char Joy. After serving 2 combat tours in Iraq, U.S. Army veteran Maribel Ramos moved to Santa Ana, California to pursue a college degree. In 2012, the 36-year-old rented a room in her home out to 55-year-old Quang Char Joy, who described himself as a single professional who was looking for work. 18 months later, in May of 2013, Ramos vanished. Her family reported her missing, and police quickly narrowed their sights on Joy after learning that he was allegedly infatuated with the missing woman. They also discovered that Ramos had called 911 2 weeks earlier during an argument with Joy and said that she felt unsafe. According to investigators, Joy bought Ramos a cruise ticket and got surgery to make his eyes younger in a bid to make himself more appealing to his roommate. But Ramos rejected Joy's advances, and when Joy stopped paying his rent, she got fed up and told him he needed to move out. They argued bitterly just before Ramos vanished, and she was last seen on security camera dropping off the rent. A search of Joy's computer activity at a local library revealed that he'd researched human decomposition and looked at satellite images of a specific location out in the desert. 2 weeks after Joy's disappearance, police went to the location and found her body buried in a shallow grave. Her remains were too decayed to determine a cause of death, but after considering the circumstances and evidence, authorities decided they had a strong enough case to charge Joy with second-degree murder. Joy maintained his innocence throughout his trial, while prosecutors argued that he panicked when Ramos told him that he had to move out. According to Orange County Deputy District Attorney Scott Simmons, the thought of moving out didn't terrify Joy for typical reasons like fear of homelessness, but because it meant that he'd no longer have access to the woman he was obsessed with and revolved his entire life around. The jury found Joy guilty, and he was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. But during his sentencing hearing, he refused to apologize because he claimed that he wasn't guilty. He became eligible for parole in 2022, but was denied both that year and again in 2023, and will not go before the parole board again until 2026. Number 2. Thomas Moni. 37-year-old Martha Brailsford had been missing from Salem, Massachusetts for several days when a fisherman found her body in the Atlantic Ocean in 1991. She'd sustained at least 5 heavy blows to her head and body before being tossed into the water with a diving belt and anchor tied to her remains. Investigators traced Brailsford's death to Thomas Moni, a married man with a history of luring women onto his boat and making unwanted advances on them while out at sea. Moni initially denied going sailing with Brailsford, then claimed that a rogue wave had washed the victim overboard. He claimed that he initially lied about having Brailsford on his boat because he was married and it would look bad, and he said he panicked and disposed of Brailsford's body after the rogue wave killed her. Authorities didn't buy his story though, and he was charged with murder. At his trial, prosecutors argued that Moni attacked Brailsford in a rage after she rejected his advances. If he panicked, it wasn't because a rogue wave tossed her out of the boat, but because he'd killed her and didn't want to face the consequences for it. Moni was found guilty of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. He faced the parole board multiple times, but continued denying that he killed Brailsford and was denied release each and every time. On at least one occasion, the parole board accused him of trying to play victim and blaming others for the board's refusal to release him. Moni died in custody from a chronic illness in 2017 at the age of 72. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Christa Gail Pike. 19-year-old Tennessee Job Corps student Colleen Slemmer had no interest in fellow student Christa Pike's boyfriend, but Pike was convinced otherwise. So in early 1995, Pike, her boyfriend, and another friend lured Slemmer to an abandoned steam plant near their campus in Knoxville under the guise of making peace and smoking marijuana together. But instead, the trio viciously attacked Slemmer. For a continuous 30 minutes, they beat, taunted, and slashed the young woman. The attackers carved a pentagram into Slemmer's chest, slashed her in the back when she tried running away, and hurled rocks at her as she begged for her life. Then, in a gruesome grand finale, Pike smashed Slemmer's head with a piece of asphalt. She even kept a piece of the victim's skull as a sick souvenir and showed it off to her friends and acquaintances afterward. During police questioning, however, Pike admitted to luring Slemmer to the crime scene with plans to hurt her, but denied planning to kill her. She said that she panicked after realizing the situation had gotten out of hand and that she'd be kicked out of the Job Corps if Slemmer reported the assault. But no amount of fear mitigated Pike's actions in the eyes of the jury, who found the defendant guilty and sentenced her to death. Pike remains on death row with no execution date set after losing her latest bid to commute her sentence to life in August 2023.
Number 10. Shana Buono. In January 2018, tragedy struck a woman named Shana Buono in the most horrific way possible. Her boyfriend Clark was a pilot. He and his 2 friends were in the cockpit of a plane while he was showing them the instruments and giving them a little bit of a tour. While that was happening, Shana was waiting for them on the tarmac below. But the aircraft was on, the engines were running, the propellers spinning, and Shana was standing way too close. That's when she got the worst idea of her life. Shana approached the plane to take a picture of herself, but wound up touching the spinning propeller. She was just trying to take a selfie, but she said it was dark. Shana couldn't see exactly where she was. She had her phone out, was excited for the picture, and suddenly was being ripped to shreds. She was struck by the propeller. which tore one of her arms completely off her body and ripped half of the other off entirely. It happened instantly, leaving no time for her to react, and because of the way the propeller hit her, there wasn't anything doctors could do to fix her up. She survived, which was a miracle in itself, but she lost the use of both her arms. Now she uses homemade prosthetics to feed herself and do makeup. Despite everything, Shana hasn't slowed down at all. She's still independent, and the last we heard, she was training for a triathlon. Number 9, Madison Bradley. Madison Bradley was going through what could have been one of the best days of her life when suddenly it was over. According to the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, Madison was killed during a tragic boating accident on Monday, July 4th, 2022. She was there for the 4th of July on the Blind River in Livingston Parish when she accidentally fell overboard and hit the propeller. Madison was only 17 years old and had her whole life in front of her. Mike Bradley, Madison's father, said that the world lost someone special that day. But it wasn't completely Madison's fault. She was only a passenger on a pontoon boat with 5 other people aboard it. It was about 5:30 p.m. and the boat party was just getting started. But the driver, 33-year-old David Crow, was wasted. Driving a boat under the influence is just as illegal as drunk driving in a car. David's impairment caused him to jostle the boat, which knocked Madison and another passenger into the water. Madison hit the propeller, which ended her life. The other person who was knocked off safely resurfaced. After the horrifying accident, David was charged with vehicular homicide. He could be spending a significant amount of his life, upwards of 30 years, in a Louisiana jail if found guilty. Number 8, Natalia and her flip-flops. Natalia Andrea Laranaga Fajardo was on vacation in Colombia in November of 2022 when a pair of flip-flops killed her. The 26-year-old California woman was shredded by the propeller of a boat after she dropped her flip-flops in the Caribbean Sea and jumped in to get them. Officials claim Natalia suffered intense bleeding from injuries to her legs, buttocks, and lower back. She jumped in the exact wrong place, so the propellers ripped her apart from the waist down. There's even footage of the gruesome incident, which shows nearby boaters screaming in shock as the deep blue sea quickly turned crimson with blood. To make things even more tragic, Natalia didn't die right away. She was whisked to the hospital and given multiple blood transfusions. She spent that time fighting for her life, but died from cardiac arrest before the doctors could save her. There was nobody to blame for what happened. It was just a stroke of bad luck. It wasn't the boat driver's fault or Natalia's. There were 23 other tourists on board and 2 crew members. There was no way Natalia could have known she was jumping to her death. Number 7, Sani Alyus. Sani Alyus was a college student in Georgia who experienced a fatal accident after a date in 2022 went horribly wrong. The 21-year-old student had taken a girl out on their first date. Being a hopeless romantic, Sani planned something amazing. He took his crush out to dinner in an airplane. The dinner went well. Everything was going great. And then they took the airplane back and landed at Georgia's Statesboro Bullock County Airport. It was dark, a little after 10:35 p.m. After the plane got to the ramp, Sani's date got out and walked to the back of the plane to wait. Next, Sani got out of the small single-engine Cessna 172 and walked straight into the propeller. Instead of walking away, he walked toward the front of the airplane and the propeller hit him in the head. He was pronounced dead at the scene when paramedics got there. His cause of death was cerebral lacerations. What this means is that the propeller broke through the bone to Sani's brain, killing him pretty much instantly, and right in front of his date, too. At least Sani didn't feel any pain. It was a horrible accident, but at least the college student didn't suffer. Number 6, Jack Fenton. A 22-year-old student was killed by a helicopter while on a summer trip in Greece during 2022. The British national named Jack Fenton died near Athens after what must have been a breathtaking helicopter ride. Jack chartered a flight from the island of Mykonos to Sparta, ancient homeland of the Spartan warriors. According to what senior police officials told the Times, Jack was the first to leave the Bell 407 helicopter. But as he moved to the back, he was hit in the head by the small rear rotor. The rotor blade hit him hard enough that he probably never even realized it. Jack was traveling with some family members. The Oxford Brookes student was with his parents, sister, and a handful of other British tourists. It's hard to imagine the despair his parents must have felt when the helicopter's pilot radioed the other helicopter, the one Jack's parents were on, to tell them the news. The second pilot then diverted from his original course and landed at the Athens International Airport. This was to prevent the man's parents from seeing where Jack was laying dead. Greek media reported that the pilot would be investigated to see if he had any hand in Jack's death. If he let the passenger off the helicopter before the blade stopped spinning, he could be in big trouble for negligence. Greece doesn't mess around when it comes to punishing bad captains, meaning the pilot could see some serious consequences. Number 5. The deadly Antonov A24. In the summer of 2022, a Russian airport worker lost their life to a propeller when they walked straight into the blades. The unfortunate incident unfolded in Russia's Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug region. The ground service agent was working near an Antonov An-24 aircraft belonging to UTair at the Beloyarsk airport. UTair is one of the top carriers in the country, and the plane was getting ready for a flight to Brezovo. While the aircraft technician was clearing the thrust pads, they accidentally made contact with the blades of a rotating propeller. The individual was only identified as a 48-year-old male. Russian media outlets weren't able to release his name. Shortly afterwards, the video of the incident popped up online. It's absolutely disturbing, and I would never recommend anyone watch it. But based on the footage, it looks like the technician didn't see where he was going. He walked straight into the moving propeller as if he didn't see it directly in front of him. Number 4. Hunter Prevost. On a Saturday night in July, Hunter Prevost was boating on Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana. According to authorities, the driver was under the influence of alcohol and may also have taken some drugs, though it was never officially confirmed. Hunter was only 21 years old, a local from Loranger. The individual driving the boat was a friend of his named Lane Keenan. The pair didn't seem to be fishing, just drinking and joyriding. The night took an ugly turn when Hunter fell off the 25-foot boat and hit the back propeller. He died in the process. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries said his body wasn't pulled out of the lake until around 7 p.m. After he was hit, his body sank and his watery corpse had to be fished out. This was yet another tragic incident of messing around on a boat. Unfortunately for Lane Keenan, he was arrested for driving a vessel while impaired, reckless operation of a vessel, and vehicular homicide. He could now go to jail for accidentally murdering his friend just because he got drunk and thoughtlessly drove a boat around. Number 3. Ground crew gone wrong. A ground crew member at an airport in Alabama died at the start of 2023 when they were sucked into the engine of a plane. The National Transportation Safety Board made a statement saying that the ground crew member was ingested. The employee, who wasn't initially named, was working at Montgomery Regional Airport when the accident happened on a Saturday at around 3 p.m. Getting hit by a propeller is one thing, but being sucked into the actual engine is somehow 10 times more terrifying. From what little we know about the recent incident, it was simply a freak accident. The aircraft was at the gate, its parking brake was engaged, and most safety measures were apparently being followed. According to what federal investigators revealed during the subsequent investigation, the worker had been warned multiple times to stay away from the airplane. The entire crew had done a safety huddle right before, being specifically instructed on how to avoid being sucked into an engine. But it was New Year's Eve. The workers were undoubtedly excited to be finished with their shift, and the victim made a simple but deadly mistake. Even though they were told 10 minutes earlier how to behave near the plane, the crew member still died. Why were the engines still on, and why were the people walking around the plane? It's because the airplane had to be left running for a cool down of 2 minutes. The auxiliary power unit wasn't working, so the engines had to stay on briefly. Still, the worker got too close, was sucked inside the engine, and never made it out alive. And although the victim was never officially identified by any reports, news outlets have recently said that it was a woman named Courtney Edwards. Number 2. Felicia Denim. In August 2022, a woman in Nelson County, Kentucky, walked into an airplane propeller and was killed. 37-year-old Felicia Denim was on a small plane traveling from Elizabethtown to Bardstown. Her brother-in-law was the pilot, and Felicia was joined by her young daughter. When the plane landed, Felicia thought it would be nice to give her daughter a better view of how to pilot an aircraft. Her idea was to walk to the front of the plane and lift her daughter up so she could see through the window of the cockpit. But unbeknownst to Felicia, the propeller was still spinning. Felicia walked right into the spinning propeller and died instantly. Not a single thought went through her head. 1 second she was walking forward confidently, then a fragment of an instant later, she was gone. In case you're wondering, Felicia's daughter survived without any physical injuries. But considering how she watched her mother die at the hands of a plane propeller right in front of her, chances are she will carry that trauma for the rest of her life. But perhaps the most shocking thing of all this is that according to the National Transportation Safety Board, this kind of thing happens all the time. They record about 3 propeller deaths each year when somebody walks into the spinning propeller of a small plane. Number 1. Tahana Smith. A boating accident went down at Lake Pleasant, Arizona in May 2022. A woman died after she had her leg cut clean off by a boat propeller. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office identified the victim as 32-year-old Tahana Smith. She jumped into the water and was immediately hit by the propeller. Firefighters first believed the incident happened during water skiing, but that wasn't actually the case. The victim simply jumped into the water on the wrong side of the boat, her foot landed near the spinning propeller, and that was it. The metal blade caught her leg, ripped most of it off, and then she started bleeding out into the murky water. Smith didn't die right away, though. She was quickly flown to a nearby hospital, where she died not long after. In this case, there was no evidence of anybody being impaired or any foul play. It goes to show that even without alcohol involved, boating can be extraordinarily dangerous. Without following proper safety procedures, a simple swim at the lake can turn into a nightmare, which is exactly what happened to Tahana Smith.
Would you rather panic and knock your best friend's tooth out after mistaking them for a home intruder, or pee your pants in public after being terrified during a prank? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.